Hunting or Bust, The Journey Onward, by Master Atlan, Chapter 19, Storm the Castle. Right! And they banked down the corner of the street and kept sprinting while following Kiba's direction. Left! Then straight. They followed the tattooed boy's directions and turned down another corner before heading straight for another block. Kiba kept his semblance active as he ran with enhanced speed and let his increased senses lead him to their kidnapped friend. He finally started to slow down as they came around a corner to one building in the upper district of the city, and the whole group slowed down. Kiba deactivated Pharaoh as his hair started slouching down, and he took a deep breath. He looked at the building and gave a small nod. This is it. This is where the trail ends. The other teens came to a stop and looked up at the massive tower that raised above them. It stretched high above the ground, so high they had to incline their heads back to catch a glimpse of the top. This being the upper district, everything in sight was filled with large skyscrapers and buildings that drew the eye around them. This tower wasn't the largest ever, but it was undoubtedly the largest building around here. While most of the complexes and buildings had just reached a dozen stories, this one went up at least twice their size, if not more. The first few floors were solid concrete and walls before turning into rows of stones and windows instead, and at the top was a larger section of glass and concrete before leading to the roof, with squared off spacing and lights coming out from it. No doubt the top office or penthouse. Naruto stared up at the building intently. He felt someone nudge his side and looked down as Ruby was also looking up at the massive structure. She hefted the black duffel bag around her shoulder and absently nodded. What was it you told me and John the first day at school? She looked at him and motioned to the tower. Best stuff happens in the big buildings, right? Naruto gave a small smile and nodded before looking up again. Yeah, who'd have thunk, huh? Wait, Pyrrha stared at the large tower and felt a sense of deja vu come over her. She gave a small shake of her head while continuing to stare at the upper floors. I've seen this building before, in the newspapers, isn't this? Velspero Relief Effort Building, Blake's answered as she stepped forward and kept looking forward like the rest of them. A program started 20 years ago to provide support and patronage to people orphaned, hurt, and thrown out of their homes by grim attacks beyond the borders of the Four Kingdoms. Kiba continued over what they had discovered from their research. People that were rendered homeless and became refugees from attacks like that were forced into border villages, creating a lot of tension and overpopulation very quickly. It was dangerous to keep the pattern like that, so they made this program to provide lodging, food, and job opportunities for the people suffering. The program was so successful during its initial run that it was picked up as an international relief effort by all Four Kingdoms. They packed up the idea and were met with great success. Teten spoke. They started setting up main offices in each kingdom that supplied the field buildings with all the materials they need. And it was all started by Velton Wilsk. Then stepped forward, joining the rest of his team as he finished what they had discovered. He found the program and he leased the space in each of the kingdoms for the main buildings to be structured. The buildings were constructed by the governments of each kingdom, and he overlooked all the activities it accomplished. Naruto shook his head for a moment and sighed before looking up again. A program that lets him run supplies from all Four Kingdoms without any suspicion from the government, one they unknowingly helped support. This is how he did it. This is how he maintained his empire. The 11 Beacon students remained silent and continued staring at the tower they were preparing to advance on. It took a moment, but sudden realization and horror lit John's face up like a bubble. He muttered, "Oh, so are we about to attack a charity?" Oh God! All the students suddenly realized what that sounded like and looked between each other in shock. They then looked back at the tower before they appeared to be disgusted by the idea. Yang grumbled, "It's probably better we don't think of it like that. Think of it like anything but that." Agreed. Yep, I'm cool with that. Right, okay, back to business. Nora shuffled forward and looked at the signs at the front of the buildings and on the doors. She pointed. It's cold. It's closed. It says they close at 7 and don't open back up until morning. Yang scoffed. Well, for a building that's closed, it still has a lot of cars sitting out front. And one of them is his car, Ruby said sternly while looking at the parking lot and spotting Wilsk's limo, the same one that had taken her partner here in the first place. She scrunched up her nose before throwing her fist up. Let's get Weiss back. Hold on. Yang nearly had to dive to catch Ruby around the stomach and pull her off her feet before she ran in there before them. The hooded girl was kicking the air and waving her arms around frantically. Grr, let me go, Yang. I got to get Yang back. I got to get Weiss back. Well, you're gonna screw it up just charging and screaming like that? No, I won't. Yes, you will. Ruby's energy drained after hearing a majority of the group agree with her sister's opinion. Geez, it was like Weiss wasn't even gone. Yang felt her sister go lax in her arms and lowering her to her feet before looking around at the others. Anyone got a plan? Because if we don't, we're gonna have to go with Ruby's break the front door idea. Pierre shook her head. That's probably not the best idea. This is charity supported by the Council of Vale. It no doubt has security at the front door. Breaking in like that would alert the police. How fast could the police get here? Maybe 10 or 15 minutes from the station, but patrol cars could get here quicker. This is the upper district, Sasuke informed them. We should put a pin in the idea until we find something else we can do to get in there. Stay here, Naruto said before he went into a quick run and headed towards the building and around it. He came around the back and found a window washing unit and platform connected to the roof of the tall building. He came back around in sight of his friends and waved them over, and they hurried out of the outside of the tower and came to the back to see what he discovered. I think we found one way to avoid breaking through the front door. Ruby stepped up to it and looked it over. Does it work? Naruto wasted no time and hopped right in before stepping over the control box. He examined it before looking down at the control panel and seeing it had a padlock. It's locked. Lucky for him, the rocket lockers came by support quick. He smiled before pulling out a short sword and aiming the hilt down, firing an arrow and breaking the lock off. He opened it with a smirk, and now it's not. Glad to see you're successfully moving past your criminal phase. Ruby hopped in and moved over to the panel to look for the one button. Okay, hang on. Weiss, we're coming. Hold on. Ruby moaned when she heard Blake halt their advancement. Again, she looked back at everyone else with an annoyed look. We can't keep stopping, guys. Weiss is probably up there with those guys, and I don't think she'd want us standing by just talking. She wouldn't, Blake answered as she jumped on the mechanical pulley system and stepped over with them. But I'm coming with you. There might be a fight when we're up there, and we need to make sure Weiss's stuff is ready before it starts. You get that to her? She looked over at Naruto, and we can hold him off. Naruto hesitated for a moment before he nodded. All right, then we should. The metal of the platform creaked again as Kiba and Yang jumped on as well. Yang grinned. She's my teammate too. And I told you I wasn't gonna let you fight this alone. Not to help percent. Okay, if you want then you guys too. But now wait, you aren't just gonna leave us down here, right? Nor seemed disappointed and disgruntled at the idea. We were promised fighting and beatdowns. And Pierre nodded. She's right. We promised we would face this together, and a place as large as this means he has security and personnel ready to defend it at a moment's notice. Our help would be beneficial. Yes, it would, but let me finish, guys, Naruto said indignantly, trying to voice his worry to everyone before they had any more ideas. He pointed down on the platform they were on. This thing seems sturdy, but I'm not sure how much it can take, and that's something we need to make sure about if we're going. Naruto pointed up, all the way up there. This close-up, John finally realized the massive size and sheer scale of the building they were going to infiltrate, slowly going up in a platform, hundreds of feet. His knees went shaky and Ren had to hold him up before he fell over. He thanked his friend for the assistance. Naruto looked back around at them. So unless we all want to hop on and see if it can hold, some of us might have to hang back. He stepped up to the railing and looked around. Who wants to stay down here? The group looked around at each other for any volunteers. Well, crap. Hunting. Weiss was masking her uncertainty and worry very well, considering she was in an elevator with 3 armed guards and Velton Wilsk without her weapon. Hell, she didn't even have her proper fighting clothes on, still dressed like a tramp off the street after getting picked up from that stupid bar, and possibly picked up to engage in illicit activities. At least one of these men has decency to give her his coat when she asked. The elevator rang and came to a stop when they reached the destination. It slid open and Wilsk and his men stepped out into the open space as Weiss was reluctant before stepping out the lift. and her heels clicked against the marble floor, and Weiss actually stopped in surprise to look at her surroundings. The room was well furnished, with black leather seats around several shelves and bookcases filled with so many books that Blake could probably faint at the sight of them. On another side of the room was a large counter and bar filled with nearly 100 of the finest wines, beers, and beverages in the world, with a hallway right beside it. Some of the finest pieces of art and tapestry lined the walls, and directly across from the elevator was a desk just in front of the opposite wall. Wilsk walked over to the desk and laid the envelope across the top before reaching for his collar and partly loosening the tie around his neck. He fixed his suit a little before turning to his guards. "You can leave us. It's fine." The hired guards nodded before moving back to the elevator and leaving Weiss standing in the penthouse alone with the other man. She looked back as the elevator doors closed and then back to the large man standing by the desk. The much larger man looked over at her before stepping behind the counter and pulling out two champagne glasses. He pulled out a bottle and started pouring into one. "Would you like a drink?" Weiss flinched as she realized she was being addressed and felt a massive sense of anxiousness overcome her. She felt a cold chill run in her blood as she needed to say something and say it fast. Okay, she was Winter, part-time singer at bars and friend of uncouth women like that horrid blanchy woman. How did girls like that act and talk? Oh wait, she had people like that on her team. The white-haired girl turned on her heels, letting her long, untrained white-haired flick around her arm before awkwardly pushing it behind her again. She gave a weird smile and let her shoulder hang. "Hey, it's cool. No problem. You know, I was actually starting to feel pretty thirsty, so thanks." He Wilsk seemed caught off guard and confused by her sudden change in demeanor. He paused for a moment. "Well, all right then." He poured into the other glass before storing the bottle behind the counter. He took both glasses and walked around to the much shorter lady, handing her the glass before walking over to his desk and sitting against it. "I enjoyed your song at the club. It was a splendid performance." "Oh." Weiss looked up from the drink and tried to relax into her stomach like a normal girl. She awkwardly fumbled and shifted in her stance to get it right. "Oh, that song? Pfft, please." She waved it off with a weird laugh. I sing stuff like that all the time. In the shower, at the bar, in the barn." Wilsk once again seemed bewildered by her choice of words and this disjointed action. He tried to continue the conversation. "Yes, well, you certainly have a lot of experience." No. Weiss immediately cut him off before he could continue with his thought. She shook her head and took a step back with hesitation. "Now listen here, fella. I don't know what some of those other girls there were like, but I don't swing that way." Her eyes widened again at what those words might mean out of context. "I mean, I do swing that way, not the other way, but I don't do stuff like that. I mean, I don't do that sort of thing, and singing in front of the crowd." Wilkes finished, hiding his surprise at how quickly the girl tried to defend herself from the hanging allegation. "Oh, yes, it was a wonderful showing, and I'm sorry." He shook his head before looking at the white-haired girl. "I must ask why you're acting so strange." Weiss furrowed her eyes for a moment before opening them up again and trying to act airheaded. "Well, because you went and brought me here so quickly, silly, and..." "No, I mean, why are you talking like that and jerking around so uncomfortably?" Wilkes inquired curiously. "Mishni, I have the strangest sense that you're acting like this for a reason." Weiss's goofy facade quickly dissipated, and a stern, scrutinizing stare took its place. She crossed her arms, making sure not to spill a drop of the expensive drink in her hand, and settled back into her hips like she usually did in her normal clothes. Her voice returned to normal, but had no solid tone. "When did you figure it out?" "Figured it out, young lady. Most of the men there only saw a pretty woman with an alluring voice, but I spotted you as a Shni the moment the lights landed on you." A self-satisfying smile came across his face. "Although I know young Winter is still an Atlas roaming around the estates back home, well, I think the other young lady is a bit closer to home around here. Am I correct, Weiss?" She was silent for a moment. "How did you know?" "I haven't visited your family's home for business in many years, but I remember coming once when you and Winter were just little. You're both quite scared to meet a stranger like me, hide behind your servant's legs for protection. It was quite a charming little sight for old men like us." The scar-eyed girl furrowed her gaze before looking down at her glass and swirling its contents around. She questioned, "So if you realized it was me, why did you bring me here? I'm going to assume it isn't for pleasantries." Well, I had my interest piqued when I saw the Harris of the Schneiders Company singing and dancing at a little club in Vale's commercial district. I can't imagine someone of your prestige would be in need of any money from a place like that. He raised a graying eyebrow. Perhaps this is some kind of rebellious attitude to your upbringing. I have met your father, and I can see where a young lady such as yourself may challenge. This isn't about rebelling against my father, Weiss quickly responded with a pointed tone before looking down for a moment. If I wished to act as childishly and petulant as that, then there would be a number of different ways to do it. She looked back up at the older entrepreneur. I only went to the cabin because I was interested in you. Wolf tilted his head in interest before letting out a small chuckle. I suppose an aspiring business head such as yourself should learn the process and mythology of her future partners. I'm only interested in some sort of business you occupy yourself in. Weiss glared at the taller older man. I know what you are, a criminal, a thug, a warmonger, and liar. Wolf's smile didn't falter as the Negro continued to press him. I know about the things you stole. I know about the people you work with. I know about the people that work for you, and I have it on good authority what kind of people you are. And that would be a monster. Wolf was silent for a moment before scratching the stubble on his chin. I'm not quite sure why you are making such an accusation. I will admire that the Hanoi cabin is not visited by the most savory of individuals, but my visit there does not immediately label me as the same as them. You're right, that's not enough. Weiss replied. The fact that you steal and participate in illegal meetings to sell and move that inventory is enough. Waltz was about to respond. Don't even try to deny it. I saw you talking with that man in the parking lot. He gave you that envelope and you said you could move it to Mistral. I have proof. She then remembered what she was wearing. I mean, not on me right now, but I have proof. Right. I did receive something in that parking lot. Wilkes reached back and picked up the file in question before holding it up. He wanted to give me this. He then held it out, willing to let the young lady take a peek at what was inside. Weiss hesitated for a moment, looking between the file and the man that offered it. She finally felt curiosity get the better of her and slowly stepped forward to take the file from his hand. He didn't make any move to grab her when she did so she stepped over to the chairs and placed her glass on the table. Wolf quietly drank his beverage as Weiss opened the envelope, pulled out the contents, and started silently roaming through them. This wasn't right. These were artifacts. Weiss seemed shocked even as she said the words, looking through the research files and paragraphs about the findings, accompanied with the pages of information about the discoveries in the sands of Baguio were pictures of what the archaeologists found. Most of them were of the men and women who found the ruins, standing by old pillars and gargantuan-sized platforms and altars, but there were even some of drawings and carvings found on the wall. Most of them were of humans and faunas being chased and attacked by Grimm, as was the usual in ancient times like that before the kingdoms. There were some carvings of humans holding up bright lights and weapons, frightening off the beasts that threatened their existence. These must have been some of the first depictions of people using dust to protect themselves. This was what started it all. Some of the first people to fight and challenge the forces that would annihilate them. Weiss turned the page and found more cave paintings that were discovered in the dig, but these were describing the efforts of faunas to defend themselves. Most of them were running from the threat, but several stick figures charged forward at the monsters of darkness, with shadowed blurring lines following behind them and horrific jagged teeth like the monsters they were defending themselves against. And in the corner of the cave was a large black mass that seemed too far away from the light of the camera to get captured in the picture. Weiss shook her head before looking up at the man. What is this? Wolf just gave a condescending smile. On the excavation, the diggers found some very rare and valuable artifacts, priceless in both the anthropological and monetary gain. The Vacuo Council did not wish to have these findings broadcasted and known to the public so quickly, believing that if they did, then he would be the target of marauders. So they sought out someone who could transport them without raising alarm. So they asked me to do it discreetly. Wolf stood back up and walked over to the white-haired girl before taking the papers out of her rigid hands. He walked back to his desk and placed the vial in a special compartment with others, very large binders hidden from sight. I'm trusted with the full faith of my customers. So if they ask for privacy, I have to plan for it. Going out of my way is just shut up. Wusk looked back up. Excuse me, don't talk like that, Weiss said with a miffed tone before glaring at the large man. You can't hide it and cover it up as much as you want, but don't mock me with the false ignorance like that. Weiss turned to him, disregarding the setting and their different sizes, and told him in a flat tone, don't insult me by trying to disprove something I know is true, something you know is true. Wusk was silent for a moment before he shut the drawer and picked up his glass again. He looked down in comprehension before noting, I appreciate I appreciated under your grandfather when the SDC was hitting its stride. Weiss seemed startled by that bit of information before the man nodded. Your grandfather was a brilliant businessman and training something of a partner to secure your father's business ventures when he succeeded the company. He taught me how to succeed, how to accept failure, how to expand, how to grow, and how to control what you own, and I will always be grateful for what he has taught me. But Wusk let out a small chuckle, appreciating that the girl was savvy enough to realize he wasn't just singing her family praise, but I felt as though he was limited by the waning of his imagination in his advanced age. He didn't seem to realize that people of position like his, people with power like ours, could continue to grow if they altered the circumstances in their favor, take control. But your grandfather scoffed at the idea, said I was silly, but look at what I have achieved with that idea. Yes, congratulations, Weiss derided sarcastically. You're a paranoid old man who schemed himself as a boss and psychopath of the criminal world. Whoopee. But I do control the flow of the black market, and a mention of my name puts every man who knows better under my heel, Wusk refuted. I consider that a real achievement. You also steal from innocent people, the government, armies, and let's not forget the company that took you in when you were young, Weiss heatedly reminded before narrowing her eyes angrily. And I know you use people. You completely disregard their safety, their lives, their interest. You find something interesting, you choose to exploit it, and then you just keep playing with it in the palm of your hands. Wilkes nodded. I learned from the best. Weiss felt the jab his words were aimed for and demanded, what does that mean? You know what it means, Wilkes returned with a stern tone and leveled glare. You know the kind of company you profit from, the kind your grandfather and father have built up, one that grows from prejudice and misery and labor, one that has left themselves targeted by hundreds of protests and death threats, and even the scorn of the militarized organization of terrorists. Say what you will about me, but at least I have the decency to keep my cruelty under wraps. The Schnee family, they thrive off it. Weiss was still silent as the man's words struck her like needles, and that cruelty has given me chances to explore some rather interesting business partners, he said snidely before picking up his glass again and holding it up in a toast. Let's hope for more opportunities soon. Weiss was silent and didn't comply until she looked up and saw the man still holding out his glass, frozen and glaring at her while he waited for her to follow. She silently picked up her glass and held it up as well. Wilkes smiled and started drinking as Weiss just stared down at the sparkling drink. She quietly raised it up and took a sip from it, letting the sting and bubbling sensation cover her tongue as she looked up and caught sight of Blake soaring upwards and past the glass before using a shadow clone to propel herself upwards again while holding out onto a wire. A second later, Naruto blurred past the glass, carrying Ruby in his arm as they left sight, and finally Yang and the rest of Jupiter and Noctix slowly rose up into sight as they traveled by a window washing platform. They were all huddled together, trying not to push each other too much as John's face was turning purple and Nora spotted her with a happy wave. Pfft. Wolska looked at the girl strangely after her little spit take as she leaned against the couch for support. He questioned, did something happen? No, it's nothing, Weiss said as she pounded on her chest with tiny tears forming inside of her eyes. It just went down the wrong way. Weiss finally righted herself and looked back up at the window over Wolf's head. Seeing her companions had disappeared from sight, she stood back up and putting the glasses aside and inquired, so, what happens now? Well, that's just it. I'm not sure what should happen next, Wilkes noted with a small smile. I should fear that you would go to your father and tell him about this, but without proof, he would never believe you. Weiss didn't respond to that before looking aside with a flat but curt look at the accusation. You aren't wrong. Now I'm usually far more wary and careful about who I choose to talk with about these matters. But Miss Schnee, you have provided me with the most entertainment as I've had since coming back to the city, and I am grateful for that. Wilkes stood up and placed a hand in his suit pocket before nodding. I feel like someday you and I could work very well together, and that would need us some trust. So tell me, how did you find out all this information? I thought it was just on intuition alone, and if you tell me, I promise you can go home without any worry. Weiss looked down at the ground for a moment, Wilkes' offer hanging in the air as he waited for a reply. Weiss stalled for a moment, lowered her hands to her side before she finally leveled a look at the man and said, "Am I supposed to be frightened by your intimidation?" Wilkes' smile turned into a flat line as Weiss stood up straight and tall while staring him down. "I'm not afraid of you. How could I be? I face the creatures of Grimm with intent to lay down my life if I must. I am under constant threat by those monsters in the White Bank, and that would love nothing more than to string me up and tear me apart piece by piece before finally killing me. Hell, I deal with a speeding ball of red, gooey annoyance that makes me want to slam my head down on a table until something cracks. You. No, not when you're just a pitiful, sad old man that's slowly destroying himself. How could I be afraid of a man destined to die, broken and alone?" She proudly placed a hand on her chest and proclaimed, "I am Weiss Schnee, and I will not bend to the will of a man such as yourself, not one so pathetic as you." Wolf's eyes slightly narrowed, but the amount of contempt conveyed in his eyes was more than enough to show how much Weiss's words pierced his mask. He slowly stepped forward until he was standing directly in front of the Schnee girl. Their massive difference in height was never more clear, as he had to look far down as she inclined her head back to stare up at him. His words fell from his mouth with disdain. "You know, it is quite noble that you would choose a profession like huntress to make the world a better place, and you're right, it is dangerous. I wonder how much your father would mourn if his precious daughter were to disappear in the middle of a training exercise, caught by Grimm, devoured without hope." His eyes narrowed at the girl. "It would be a tragedy for you to perish like that, for the sake of protecting something." Crash! The skylight above them shattered into shards of glass as they instinctively covered their heads and stepped back. Wilson took a moment after stepping back to look up at what happened, but was shocked when he saw an orange and blue blur turn in the air and strike him in the bridge of his nose with a kick. Agah! Wilkes stumbled into his desk as he dropped his drink, hearing the glass shatter on the floor as he propped himself up against his desk. After the initial shock, he looked back up and gasped at the sight in front of him. The floor was covered in shattered glass, and from the skylight dropped nearly a dozen shadows along the space between him and the elevator. All of them were young adults dressed vastly different from one another, and all brandishing weapons aimed at him. And the moment they landed, the only ones who didn't have weapons right now were himself and Whites, who was standing behind the person at the front of this little pack of strangers. Except he wasn't a stranger. He was wearing the same black pants with orange seams and boots he usually wore. Instead of the long-sleeve blue shirt he usually traveled with, he was wearing a short-sleeve shirt underneath his orange vest with the black bandana over his head. He had a short blade in one hand and his normal sword's blade aimed at the larger man's face. His blue eyes focused and nearly slits while glaring at him. Nactor finally spoke and shattered the silence with a smirk. "Hey boss, long time no see." End of chapter 19.